You have an AI writer?
I do. Do you want me to turn it on?
Yeah, because I need the transcript afterwards for YouTube.
Okay, perfect. All right, I turned it on.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is PTO week, and welcome to Autism Experience podcast. So, for today's recording, I brought probably the most corporate person that I've ever had on the show. This is just to kind of go back and forth, discuss a little bit about not only her life and her business, but kind of how she sees the landscape nowadays. This
Yeah.
is former executive vice president of recruiting April, and it's awesome that we finally found the time and we took for her to stop by the show. So, one thing I'm going to start with, I'm going to give you a very vague, interesting thing. You said to me about a couple weeks ago when I showed you a YouTube video, Philosophical Gamer, and trust me, I the criticism you left in that is that he can get too political. Well, yeah, because like most of us in the millennial generation, well, I completely understand that a lot of us were disappointed in our career trajectories, especially myself, and he does get too political in those videos because I watch a lot of his. I've watched probably like 20, 30 of his videos. I think he could tone it down, but unfortunately that's his channel, and
Yeah.
that's just who he is. That's just who he is. He's built up to somewhere from like he's well over 20K connections on YouTube. He's probably like one of those $1 million channels. I have plenty of friends in real estate who do this. In fact, my earliest mentor, Dan Friedenberg, who's tagged frequently, he has that level of a channel.
Okay. That makes sense.
But it's different. So I've been, my CTO has actually sent me a bunch of economics videos in the last 2 days. So I'm not going to go too politically into this, but I'm basically going to describe, when we're going to start talking about your life in corporate, there are three different economic schools. To understand why a lot of people are not necessarily unhappy is to understand how economics works. And I'm guessing in reference to one of my questions, especially being in HR and you did an MBA, you probably got a foundation in economics as I did, correct?
So I got my master's in human resources, but did deal with compensation when I worked in human resources, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay. Now, did you do an undergrad in business?
No. So I actually don't have a traditional route. I have an undergrad in English and then a master's in human resources.
I went the business route, but that was just because in my situation, unfortunately, when we go back to the 2000s, when you and I were both respectively in high school, unfortunately, the only subjects that I was pretty sadly good in were writing, even though a lot of people still point out my grammar to this day, which isn't necessarily my fault. It's just now we have better tools
We have better
to me
tools,
for
yeah.
me to be able to work around that because honestly, our boomer parents, and I love them to death, their favorite thing was to literally be grammar Nazis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about actual Nazis. I'm talking about like, well, this, you have weaknesses in this area of writing. It kind of needs to look like this. It was always the red pen which you feared when you were a student.
Right. That makes sense.
So the three different schools, as I was a business student, there are three different schools. Adam Smith was the classical school. F.A. Hayek and John Maynard Keynes were basically the more the more of what you see of government intervention versus completely unfettered free market. So in this sense, when we talk about economics between you and me, what I'm referring to is what is the first place coming out of college that we most need at base to be able to understand how economics works?
So that's a great
The
question.
job market.
The job market. So, Benjamin, we've been like friends on here, what, 2, 3 years at this point? That's been a while. So you probably are familiar with the fact that I graduated. So I learned from a cautionary tale. I incurred $50,000 in debt for a master's degree only to graduate, and I couldn't find a job because I didn't have experience. So I had to start off as a volunteer. in HR first, right?
Do I
So,
really want to call that out? Yeah,
okay,
too bad. So here's what I'm going to say about that. See, the experience word is I'm not going to call it political, but what I am going to say is it's one of the most overused words ever. And it's still
of
being
course, and
used to this
it's
day.
often used in a lot of different ways. It's a way for hiring managers to scapegoat just not moving forward a candidate. It's a way for them to, if they say that you're over experienced, it's because they don't want to pay you potentially. It could be because they don't want to have someone on the team that they might perceive as uncoachable, unteachable. There's so many different reasons why people use that term.
And my rebuttal to that is depending on the age of the person, without me trying to go
Sure.
necessarily be ageist, I think workplaces, not I think, I've noticed workplaces have not completely evolved into the 21st century.
Yeah, the real workplace in the real world is different than the one that people write about on LinkedIn. Um,
I believe me, I've noticed that. That's probably one of the biggest reasons, like including like YouTube creators like Joshua Fluke, why I cringe at this. I'm like, you and I have a very close friend also who you did a collaboration with, and I love her to death. But one thing I would say to both you and her in the time that I've known you guys is when we're talking about my situation, I hate when people, and it's not just her, this has been done to me for 15 years. Oh, comparison is the thief of joy. We're not talking about comparison. We're talking about the fact that maybe not everyone wants to acknowledge that they were given the right opportunities out of college and that I wasn't, especially as somebody who spent up to 15 years in retail
yeah,
and
so
took,
I
took
think that
9 years, took 9 years to finish school. Your turn.
no, no, no. So I just want to say I know who you're mentioning. Obviously, she's a really good friend of mine. And I also
Same
come
here.
from a school of belief that I do think everyone has an Achilles heel in life. That's not to limit yours. I think that everybody's real experience is very visceral to them. I can understand where you're coming from because I wasn't given a chance and I actually had to volunteer for several months before being able to move into roles. But I also want to share that I think that lack of opportunity also presents different. Some people simply don't get the opportunity, or some people get partial opportunities where they find out that they're paid 50% less than other people because of whatever the situation is, right? Which has been my case throughout my career. I've been chronically underpaid. Um,
Well, there's also, yeah, but you were still employed. Granted, with the fact that you come from a much different community than I do, where statistically, yes, women of color have been a lot less paid for roles. But depending on the level we're talking about, I'll give you an example. Women basketball players. Do I think they have a case for versus what, black men in the
sure.
NBA make? Absolutely. But at the same time, they're in the millionaires bracket. It's like at a certain point, while I completely respect and understand where you are coming from, it's not me in your situation where one person is making statistically a lot less, given the fact that you've dealt with this in HR and recruiting before, probably. Who do you think, aside from black women, is the second most underrepresented, underpaid group? Autistic
So
people.
I will say that likely, yeah, likely it's individuals who are disabled or differently abled. I'll use that term. And because that doesn't mean that you're not able to do the job, right?
And
Um,
actually, I have a huge problem with that wording since we're both old enough. In 1994, and I'm going to say something because I still don't like this word either, but it needs to be used for context purposes. We
sure.
still throw around the mentally retarded word just in a completely different manner and
Yeah.
context that's a lot more politically correct. I don't care how much you change the word. You are still basically telling someone who doesn't have the same train of thought as you that they are basically worthless and not a contributor to society.
Yeah, that's fair. As somebody who's also neurodivergent and not adult diagnosed neurodivergent, because there's a rise in people being diagnosed now as adults. I was diagnosed as a child.
Yeah,
I
because they
understand.
were living in the closet for so long, not thinking that they were, and they didn't bother because our boomer parents were kind of afraid of that.
That is true. But I would also say
My
some of I would
father
also
and
say some of
mother,
it
as
was
two,
trendy.
My father and mother, for example, were different on this, and I don't ever blame them anymore at this point. But when I look at the 1990s and the 2000s, what I would say is this: if there's a reason why I'm in entrepreneurship now, and I just had a wonderful guest about a month ago, whose episode is going to be going up in the next week, who's in our age group. He lives in the United Kingdom. He's also gay and blind. His name was Jamie Shields.
Okay.
England has the exact same issue with ableism and racism as the United States. In fact, if you actually go back to the foundation of this country, what's the big notice? We were settled by English people.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if the colonial settlers came from an English background, most of our laws are based off, what was being used in England. It's just instead of having a king, you have the president of the United States, and the prime minister in this case would be the vice president. So just
Yeah.
different government models and different set of laws. I do a lot of independent studying in my free time just to kind of see, how different governments and different systems, are set up versus this country. And this country isn't necessarily a bad setup, but that's another discussion entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So you come from Rochester, correct?
Yeah.
Would you say in the Rochester area that those schools are underrepresented in the state?
Yes. So I'll give you an example. I was telling my husband about it the other day. A lot of the schools are super underfunded and they make you go to schools that could be across the town. I live next door to a really good school, but they bust me across town to a very horrible school. Um, there was a young lady I went to school with that got straight A's. She applied to like top Division 1 schools. I think she also applied to some other ones, but because she didn't take AP courses, remember AP courses? The
It's really funny you mentioned AP courses because that was not something I think my parents thought I would do well in. The one I probably would have done best in would have been AP history. And yes, I do. I'm
Mhm,
old enough to remember AP courses.
mhm.
Those were not being pushed for everyone, and they
They
should
weren't
have.
being pushed, and there has to be funding for it, right? So our school didn't have funding. We didn't have AP courses at all.
Oh, it's
And
funny
so
because I went to John Jay Cross River, and considering that's a kind of a wealthy, affluent area, I'm using code for exactly what I'm talking about too, which is most of my peers were literally white people. We had some black people, but not too many. That was the whole thing. Because in order to live up there, and you'll understand this, both parents had to be making six-figure incomes because of how expensive the Cross River Katona area is, where you have parents who were, when we were kids, and well, your father was in a union. So,
mhm,
obviously you had a pretty good childhood. Mine worked in corporate as an accountant. My mother had five figures. We were able to keep me up there, but the only kind of bigger thing was, unfortunately, my parents divorced when I was five.
I
So
gotcha.
unfortunately, a divorce that young, which I pointed out to our friend, in some conversations, which I think she finally understood. If you end up with a young divorce, there's a lot of things that are not going to help you out later on in life.
Hmm.
And one of those areas is, even though they are both in my life and they both help me on some level financially because of the divorce and separation, unfortunately, it left me, without probably realistically good opportunities and then still a very bad understanding of autism to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So we didn't have AP courses. Moral of she didn't get into any colleges that she
Did
wanted
she
to.
have to go to community college?
She went to a D2, a Division 2 school, so like a St. Mary's College or something like that. But she did apply to some of those top universities and she wasn't able to get in because she didn't have AP courses. That's how underfunded the school was.
And unfortunately, this goes into one of three different schools, because I've noticed something with this country. This goes to the Austrian school model, where we basically suggest that government shouldn't be involved. But if you go to the classical school, government is supposed to at least have some function in society. where, you know, things like your friend's situation or your classmate's situation, had we had some level of, government kind of providing guide, she might have been able to go to a, she would have, you guys would have gotten the funding for AP courses, which would have helped for college.
Yeah. So that was basically my start. I couldn't, so I started off at community college, which was 13th grade. Figured out
Oh,
how,
so did I. I went to
yeah,
WCC because of the fact that both my parents separated. My father got remarried, and I do have a half brother and sister.
okay.
Unfortunately, there was money that was set aside for me by my deceased grandfather in 1999 that their mother took. So unfortunately, I had to end up going the community college route. I did have his support, but like you, and I didn't even get to a master's degree, I ended up as an autistic with up to, and this was full time to part time at Mercy College, having to take student loans out because he would not support Mercy College. And years later, I understand why. It was because Math 116 took me 17 times just to get through. So, do I blame him? No. Do I blame him for saying exactly what he did to me? No. But when our parents were growing up, our college education actually kind of made sense to them because in a recent conversation, guess what he said to me finally?
Hmm.
I went to college because it was considered the prestigious thing to do at that time. And I had to corner him into that because he's been complaining about this all the way to up to my 40th birthday in September. While I get why, what he doesn't seem to, he seemed to basically go covering his ears wah when I finally said to him, whose generation is running HR departments still now to this day, Dad? My generation or your generation? He's like, unfortunately, my generation. You guys are making the calls at the top of HR saying we need some level of a degree program to be able to understand if you can, fly over and start making this amount of money coming out of college. So the way the bachelor's degree is used or the master's degree, I would agree with you that I think those are poor uses for it to have somebody go up to 50 to 70K in debt just for a degree. And in fact, Philosophical Gamer did an exact video about this, which I turned into a post. What
Hmm.
if I what if I pitched you this business idea and told you in order to qualify for an entry level job or a mid level job, which is pegged as entry level, you had to invest up to 70K just to get a bachelor's degree? Would you think that's a good business proposal or not to be able to qualify to get a job? And obviously a lot of people liked that post, but that came from him because he did a whole complete breakdown, with an AI channel on why it's not a good idea to tell somebody at the college age, hey, you need a bachelor's degree if you want to be able to advance in the world. My CTO and I go back and forth with this every day. You and I've told him how you and I feel about the degrees. It's not that we're against education, we're against the way it's deployed and used.
Yeah. So here's my thought, and I want to keep to time, but my thought on education now with my own children is that they're only going to go if it's for an essential degree that leads to either working with technology or licensure, whatever that is. Otherwise, I'll be pushing the trades.
I would almost say at this point, because I mean, if you've seen my latest posts, I've even been hinting at this. I'm like, you want me to go back and invest more money for either a higher degree or extra skills, but you're not necessarily going to hire me, then this is why I would be focusing on, building into a media agency because education can be done at any time.
Yep.
My whole thing is this. I'd rather, if I'm going to reskill, and my mother even asked me this last night when I told her, in my spare time, I'm taking some different skill classes on Udemy. She's like, is it for a job? I'm like, have you seen the state of the economy this year? No. If corporate right now, even from your background, is only pushing temp to perm contracts, why would I want to go out into that situation? And it's only about to get worse, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not an economist, but most creators on LinkedIn don't want to acknowledge this, but that's where you have people like me who are finally saying, hey, just an FYI, trying to get a job this year is a dumpster fire. I wouldn't even bother. I would just work on myself. And that's advice to Gen Z, who are even now doing what we wished we could have done back at their age.
Yeah, if I could have had a social media career back in their age, because, social media took off around the time we both graduated high school, I think life would look very different. There's also more jobs now, Benjamin, that allows you to pay for school. Like I was in a rush to get done in 4 years, but back in 2005, there weren't a lot of companies actively paying for college the way some of them are now. And I would rethink getting done in 4 years or doing it across 6 years and letting them pay class by class instead of having 150 plus K in debt.
So interesting that you said that, because even in my situation, I would go back to when I was their age in 05. The problem with me starting this late, in my working years with doing even just a podcast now and going into digital products, I was not around the right people to be able to do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know you went to SUNY Albany for the English degree, and you mentioned that at the start. And then obviously you climbed all the way up to to being a vice president in an HR department. Was it worth it, or would you have done a different level of the business world over recruiter? Because here's the thing. When I've seen your content before, I'm not always considered, the audience or reasonable client you're looking for necessarily. But, even with our friend, I just raised these opposite points. Like, for example, I raised to her a really good point from last week on her clapping for others. Let's change situations. You're in my situation, and let's just face it, they're basically rejecting you on premise of some level of accommodations, the fact that they don't seem to want to take the time to train someone on the autism spectrum. How would you feel? And then you were stuck
So,
in retail for 15 years.
yeah, so I know people who are not, so I have a different view because I actually know people who actually are considered, what is the word? And I hate using these words, but for the purposes of not having another word, they're considered neurotypical. Um, and they've been kept,
I
in
call
what I,
that non-autistic.
okay, non-autistic. Um, and when I say neurotypical, I'm dyslexic, so I just say, neurotypical. Um, where they have been stuck in what I consider like entry level roles for various reasons. So I'm in upstate, and they're neurotypical. So I'm seeing both. So I do have a different view of it, Benjamin, only because I do see a lot of people. So I live in upstate New York. It is extremely segregated here, and most of my peer group here is still working entry level base roles.
That's been the problem for me. And that's what I've tried to explain to our friend, which sometimes I do know deep down inside she gets it, but other times she wants to try to not discuss it. But it's like we have to be discussing these things, especially now, because I'm not a parent. You two are. You guys are going to get your kids' generation. They're going to be smart. They're not going to sit there and take, parents lying to them about why aren't people getting ahead in this world. And they'll see it now with the internet, especially with advances in artificial intelligence, which on some level, I'm skeptical with AI, but I think it can definitely come in handy if you're running a business.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
your
I,
children are going to probably come up to you and ask you one day, why are X, Y, and Z, particularly stuck in this type of a role that's probably not suited for them? Or why is it that they're not happy? And
Yeah.
the rebuttal to that is it's going to be interesting to hear what you and her, tell your kids, or what parents in our age group are telling their kids, because it's not an easy discussion that most people want to have, but it's a necessary discussion. If you want to help people like me who are on the autism spectrum, it's beyond, hey, you could go back and reskill for a 9 to 5. No, it's a waste of my time. I should be building a bit. I should be saying at this point, it's not worth my time to continue to participate in a job market that's not going to necessarily reward me, whereas I can build the company or build the way, even though this isn't what I exactly had in mind at 39, but I have to do
When
something
do you turn
somewhere.
40?
Huh? September 13th.
Okay, yep. So we're just 10 days apart. I'm the 23rd.
One of my other guests, who was an upstate Albany charter school principal, actually turns 45. So she was joking with me, and it's the same birthday, and it's the same exact birthday, the 13th. So that's very interesting. But what I would say up to this point is there's somebody that I follow on Instagram by the name of Sunit Boval. And
Okay.
she's that AI CEO. When you have her saying that we should be when we should be training children of the future to be better human beings, I think that says something. Or she had one video in the subway where she said, instead of asking them what they want to do when they grow up and build them to careers, you should build them to be human beings.
Yeah.
Because right now, looking at the deployment of artificial intelligence and the large unemployment numbers, even my CTO was just saying it to me, who's a web developer, this is the time to build a business.
Hmm. Yeah, I would
Not
agree with
just for
that.
Gen Z, but for people who are in my own situation, who are facing constant projections. This is the time for you to basically think, what can I take from my work experience resume and work with it? For you, that was career coaching. For me, it's building media. This is
Hmm.
probably what I should have been doing back in 2005, but I will preface the fact that I didn't have the people in my life, who I call the old crew, are basically what I like to call the people who succeeded with a 9 to 5. That's not best for everyone.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that now.
Yeah. I actually predict that in the next 5 to 10 years, full-time work as we know it will not exist.
Reid Hoffman actually was the one who first predicted that.
Yep.
And you know what else I would say that was different from when you and I and all our peers came out of high school to today? It's no longer what you know, it's who you know. Now it comes down to, even my best friend who just got married 2 years ago probably would hate me for saying this. Who you know is now no longer going to get you a job. It's how transparent are you on sites like LinkedIn and Facebook and social and any level of social media.
So I would say, because most of the executives I work with, many of them don't really have a digital footprint. Um, I see that twofold, where there is truth to that, but it's also they got the job because they were 6 degrees separated from the hiring manager. Or they network their way in, or different things like that. So who you know is still very important. That's been the original card since the beginning of time. I don't think that'll ever go anywhere.
That won't go anywhere, but I'm going to give you a great example for this. You watch sports.
I don't.
Look this up because he
But
has
I
his
will be
own
able to
podcast.
understand. My dad's a Bills fan.
Your dad's a Bills fan, fair enough. Okay. Former Indianapolis Colts punter Pat McAfee is a perfect example. Comes out of the NFL, retires in 2016. Gets hired at Barstool Sports because basically once you've worked in the NFL, even if you're a starter, you're pretty much going to be able to network your way into a job. This also happened with uh, Marjorie Acosta Ruiz, who was a cheerleader for the Dolphins, and now she's got her own podcast, but she's on networks like ESPN. And that NFL experience for the both of them opened a ton of doors. Now, you and I aren't necessarily going to be able to tap that type of a network, which is why I started a podcast in the first place. But we had to talk about something that I actually dream of doing. I would love to get into a studio with people like them as a TV host, because Pat McAfee showed if you grow social media the way he did, just as a personality, that brand right there will take you anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, personality is king right now. We're seeing that with a lot of brands and how it's blowing up.
Yeah, and I would say this, not everyone, it should probably necessarily have a social media, but especially with Gen Z, I can understand now why everyone's complaining they don't want to work. No, it's not that they don't want to work. It's that they're seeing what you and I saw from a young age, coming out of, either being stuck in college or working retail for too many years, which is, it's kind of not, it doesn't really necessarily pay anymore to be going through that type of a traditional path. When somebody like me can barely afford a house now, I think there's argument for something being wrong with, with how wages and salaries are. I don't
Yeah.
complain anymore about wages and salaries, because what I realized is this. I'll give you one more good example, and then I think that'll be it for today. Are you familiar with Nusir Yassin?
Mm-mm.
He is Nas Daily. He was a 200,000 a year. He was a 200,000 a year web developer back before 2014 who started making short videos for Facebook. This ended up blowing up into a media agency. The only reason he was able to be more successful much quicker was because of that 200,000 a year salary that he had as a web developer. And I
Yeah.
understand why people suggest you want to be making more money. But my whole thing is, just because you have a higher salary doesn't mean you're going to start building a business. You can get started with any amount of money. It's just, are you driven to do it?
Yeah. So I will tell you that, the school of thought is you need to be making or replacing your salary before you start a business. That's not realistic for everyone, and their situation. So for me, I wanted to know, could I make half my salary with half the effort while I was working? And if I could do that, then I could make it if I gave it full effort. And so I did that consistently for about 3 to 4 months before I made a decision to leave work. Was I made half.
Compared to, not comparing to you, I make a lot less than everybody else, but I just managed to say, you know what, start with a podcast. It's not going to be too expensive right now with just a few things like Zoom, with like a Zoom license, some basic equipment, selfie ring. And then while I'm interviewing people like yourself and everybody else, learning from your career, structure a digital product.
Yeah.
And then if that does well, whether it's courses or, resources for organizations to do consulting, start taking that money and then investing it. This is what I mean when I say most people who want a salary are probably still stuck on the 9 to 5.
Yeah. Well,
And they're not.
there are still some jobs that I think are worth pursuing. It just depends on if it's in alignment with like the tech sector. Like right now, a good friend and I had a call the other day, and she was mentioning that someone that she knows wanted to go back to school for this humanities degree. And those, we know that, Benjamin, those don't pay right now, right? Like going back to school for a master's in public health, or a master's in human services or things like that. If you're going to spend all that money, you have to make sure you're doing research to say, where are jobs growing in the next 10 years if I'm going to invest this cash?
I'm going to leave you with something. If you wanted to, on a Thursdays, you could come to my friend Linda's Save the Chat and learn about other sides of the country. Although I wouldn't ever recommend that anyone goes into real estate investing deals unless they're able to trust the operator, as she told me, and this was also a past guest, and it came up because I'm starting to invest in a different coach who lives down in Maryland, and she's of a healthcare background to help me kind of grow and build a digital product, with my podcast. When I was discussing Save the Chat with her, she's like, you got to be careful with those real estate investing deals. I'm like, I go to those meets on Thursday as what we call a podcast host or service provider, but it also teaches me about other sides of the country. Like, for example, she has people coming in from Columbus, Ohio, which is now actually building up. It's more than just a college town now. They're, you know, Houston, Texas, where Linda lives, and other places are really starting to build up now. So you're right about the researching the whole jobs thing, because if I ever wanted to relocate, at least I have those people now to kind of bounce ideas off with what they're doing within the real estate sector. That's actually networking. What I see what I see other colleagues of yours posting, I would say networking has become one of the most butchered terms in our short 20 years of working, to where everybody misunderstands what it actually is. This is actual networking. Going to the hiring manager should really be not even called networking. That's just called, I would like to sit down with you and maybe discuss potential role. That's not networking.
Yeah. Um, I think that networking also, people don't realize that it's really relationships. I've never really seen anyone go hand their card to someone and just land a job. It's being intentional over several months with lead time in front of what you need for it to work. And I see people fail miserably at that every day.
Oh, look at me. I haven't even handed out a card, and I do things like this where I act, because you're my 35th or 36th guest now, and nobody wants to learn from somebody like me about what actual networking is. Just
Yep.
like with Linda, I have no expectations within that group. I will be getting guests out of that, but the point is to even go to those virtual type of events just to be able to talk with people. Later on down the line, they might have somebody they can suggest for me. That's actually networking. Same with you. You may know people
Yeah.
down the line who may want my service or coming on my podcast, and that's why you do things like this. This is called using your creativity to network versus just going to an event or a job fair. That's not networking.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
I've done those posts before, which I'm pretty sure you've probably scanned and taken a look at, and you've been like, oh, so now he's just truth dropping. The last thing I will say with LinkedIn, and I agree with creators like Joshua Fluke on it, it was once a respected platform, and it still has some level of respect to this day. But the way people create content, honestly, I think they need to be less cringy and more straightforward.
Yeah. But couple that with the fact that we've went back to 2019 where employers are monitoring. I have clients now, Benjamin, where we usually pick 3 content pillars for them. And one of their content pillars I recommend to be their employer, because if they do keep it too real, they're getting pulled into HR on here. So that's
Would
one
you
of the,
be surprised I haven't gotten in trouble for this? And I've been doing this safely for a bunch of years, because when I
it just
come onto
depends.
LinkedIn, I separate I separate work, Benjamin, from what I'm doing on social media healthcare. I never come on and discuss healthcare once.
Yeah. But if your company's listed on your profile, and even when people say what I say is not a reflection of my organization, if they're on your profile, it is.
Well, that's true, but see, when I go onto LinkedIn, I discussed autism, so they've never had an actual issue,
Yeah. Yeah.
and nor do they seem to pay attention.
And that makes a lot of sense. But like there are some people I've worked with where we do have to be careful about the topics that they decide to approach because they've been pulled into HR, even if it's adjacent to their field.
Which is why I crafted this persona for myself in the first place, was so that I knew I didn't get caught.
Good for you.
Yeah, because my organization probably could have pulled me in over the last 2 to 3 years, but since I post mainly about autism and I'm really only using it to promote a podcast, they're just like, whatever. He's not violating security protocols.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
If I were violating security protocols, or I were complaining about company policy, then it would be a different story. But I'm like, nah, because all I'm doing is basically building myself up to sell consulting services.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for coming by today. And one last note. My first guest was Dan Freidenberg, and we did exactly the same thing, which is he allowed me to use his link. I haven't done this in a while, and I would have used my own link because I typically go hours, but this is much appreciated and saved me a major headache for the week while I
Yes.
was on vacation. So
Uh-huh.
much appreciated. Thank you for stopping by.
No
And I
problem.
will have some other panel debate topics on my other umbrella podcast, the main one, that I'll probably be sending you potential invites for, just showing you content for. You can let me know if you want to participate, because we're going to debate. Two of them for the fall are going to be post-secondary education, primary education in the job market, and then one fully for the job market where I have three to four people running for about an hour. So I'll be in touch with you. Okay.
Okay, perfect. All right. Let me
All right.
stop the
Have a good
recording.
one.
1 second. Yeah.